Afghanistan, or more popularly called Khorasan, has been a hotbed of cultures, a mixing pot of where different civilizations clashed and combined. Knowledge, food, clothes, and even identity were shared amongst the people. But there was one thing that was also shared: mysticism, magic, and the art of summoning jinns. This is shamanism in Afghanistan. Afghanistan historically was a place where different civilizations came to a head. The Mongols, the Uyghurs, the Turks, and even the neighboring Kazakhs and the Uzbeks clashed in this ancient battleground, and with it they brought their shamanistic practices. Of course, most of these practices were deeply ingrained within the religions of that time, such as Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Though there was an even older and more native religion in Afghanistan called the cult of Zun. The name Zun was dubbed by Xuanzang, who was a Chinese Buddhist explorer to Afghanistan. He bore witness to many rituals of the cult and said that the shamans of the cult had these supernatural-like abilities in which they were able to control demons, summon them, and force them into their bidding. And once these demons or jinns were under their control, they would use these entities to either heal people or harm them. It is said that they drew power from a golden idol which had ruby eyes. However, the cult didn't last long after the arrival of Islam, and it died out somewhere 200 years after the arrival of Islam. Because after the arrival of Islam, everything changed in Afghanistan. The old religions were pushed out to make space for Islam. However, some of these practices and rituals which were deeply embedded in people continued to live secretly in parts where religion was either weak or illiteracy was high, and therefore the pagan rituals somehow found a way to survive. But then even Islam became divided further into sects and mysticism, and Sufi Islam dominated Afghanistan for much of its history, as the Turks often found themselves closer to Sufi Islam rather than the more hardline fundamental form found elsewhere in the Arabian Peninsula. This gave birth to mystics who now use the power of the Quran to control and exercise the jinn. Yet even within Sufism, there are certain type of Sufis who were called the Mullang, who came from an established order or silsila that had their own in-house training on how to exercise the jinn. To understand shamanism, one needs to understand how Afghanistan views jinn and how it fits into their cosmology. Historically, jinns have been called Jinn in Afghanistan, and they are said to inhabit graveyards, haunted buildings, and lonely highways. They are said to be usually of two colors. One is white and the other is black. And as you can guess, the white one is said to be benevolent while the black one is often evil. Usually the black ones will take the form of animals that are dangerous to humans, such as snakes and scorpions. In the past, if one of these creatures would have bit a human, the blame would always go to a jinn. They believe that a jinn would turn into these creatures to bite the individual. Sometimes the jinn would seize people, often causing them to suffocate or go mad. There is a term that was popular in Afghanistan called Jinn Giriftan, which means seized by the jinn. That's when a person who's been possessed by a jinn wakes up to find himself not only unable to speak but unable to move, a sort of paralysis. It's easy to mistake this as sleep paralysis, as the symptoms are the same. However, there is a key difference. In Jinn Giriftan, the usual victim is always awake when this happens. This is where a Mullang comes in, and whose role varies, as sometimes he wears different hats. He can be a holy man, an exorcist, a clairvoyant, or simply a madman that is able to communicate with the jinn. The history of Mullang starts from a role called Bakshi in Central Asia. In the medieval Islamic age of Afghanistan, during the Turks, Kazakhs, and Uzbeks, a Bakshi was an exorcist and a sort of medium that was able to communicate with the jinn. The Bakshi would use jinn as their familiars to often cure illnesses and foretell the future, amongst other things. This profession was hugely popular in the Kazakh society, and when Islam was introduced in the Kazakhs, this was passed on to the mullahs or the other religious folks. In time, from their lineage were born the Mullang, who have somewhat perfected the art to some extent. To recognize a Malung is very easy because they wear an almost weird set of clothing including robes, chains, wooden beads around their neck, a bowl, and a metal staff called the asa. Sometimes they carry an ornamental axe for aesthetic or to display their victory over the Jinn that they have conquered. Prior to 1973, when the communist coup happened in Afghanistan, Malungs were quite popular and even in some Western secular circles, but majority of them would be found in poor illiterate communities, and for some communities they would be the first point of contact. A big reason for this would be that scientific medicine is really expensive and only available to the few. Therefore, many poor communities find it difficult to access good doctors to treat easy ailments. However, as the politics changed post-1973, so did the impact it had on the Malungs and the communities who benefited from them. They were significantly reduced post-communist coup, with the impact of communism affecting the Afghans. There are 3 ways a Malung can become a Malung. Number 1. Attain a level of supernatural madness called Jalal-i-Shudan. Number 2. Using drugs. And number 3. Being apprenticed to another Malung. Let's talk about the first one. Those who have become Jalali or mad seem to be conversing with the spirits. They talk when no one is there. They talk when no one is listening. They talk when they're alone. It seems they're always wandering aimlessly sometimes, but deep in conversation with the spirits. People would approach these men for help, thinking that they could cure illnesses and diseases. People who think these sometimes refer to them as companions of the Jinn. However, Jalal-i-Shudan is an anomaly cursed upon to the very few. Those who cannot achieve Jalal-i-Shudan can contact the world through other means, and that is through drugs, specifically datura. Dubbed the scariest drug in the world, it is a powerful hallucinogenic that drives its consumers into deep hallucinations that affects their health. It causes a loss in appetite, skin disease, and respiratory illness. There is no inherent scientific use for this drug, and most people avoid it. Not the Afghan shamans though. They love this drug, as it allows them the power to contact the world of the Jinn and converse with them. However, unlike the first method, this method only allows the contact to stay as long as the hallucinogenic stays in effect. During the effects of the drugs, the Malungs would recite verses from the Quran and go into some sort of deep meditation, and can often be seen conversing with the Jinn, though to the outside person it looks like they're conversing with themselves. Tobacco would also be mixed with the datura, and these chants and rituals would sometimes last hours, where they would talk with their Jinn familiars, but God knows the lasting health impact it has on their bodies and on their souls. And last but not least is being apprenticed to another Malung. Those who wish to become a Malung would often find another Malung and shower him with gifts, money, or personal services in order to attain their tutelage. The Malung would mentor them on different drugs they can use, including datura, and impart a sort of bestiary on different jinns and how to communicate with them, and how to control yourself if you ever come under Jalal-i-Shudan. The many rituals they need to perform, including a healing ritual, and when the pupil is ready, he is given an exam to tame the demons, Tashkir-e-Afrid. It is a 40-day initiation called Chilla-Nihastan. This initiation requires 3 things: physical isolation called Khilwat, the recitation of verses, Zikr, and fasting, Roza. Often it takes the initiate 12 to 40 days to complete the trials, but as the trial reaches 40 days, it becomes significantly harder, something we'll talk about much later. The initiates are given 3 choices as to where they want to spend their isolation: inside a cell in a mosque, in a cave, or somewhere on the mountainside far away from home. Usually most go with caves, that is preferred due to the fact that the Quran was revealed in a cave. Then, when they have found a special place, the initiate is then told to draw 7 circles, one within the other, and he sits within the innermost circle. This is done to form a barrier between him and the Jinn that they need to subdue. The Jinn would then begin to appear on the outermost circle and would either just sit there, staring at him, or try to penetrate the circle. They would mock, laugh, or threaten the initiate to make him lose focus, But it is all an illusion, as they are masters of trickery and they will do anything to make the initiate lose focus and kill him. Even pausing for a few minutes is said to be lethal. As the Malung chants, Jinn would appear as animals, dwarves, and even take forms of humans, and each time he is able to endure their mental torture they inflict upon him, he grows stronger and is able to subdue the Jinn. But as the days grow, even more powerful Jinn appears and it gets harder to subdue them. However, if they do manage to subdue powerful Jinn under their command, they can either cure great sickness or cause great illness or harm, such as burning down houses of their enemies or cause lethal illness. If the initiate manages to somehow last till the latter stage of the ritual and subdue an enormously powerful Jinn, then he is said to have surpassed human limitations, and there are sources which say that if an Afghan Malung reaches this stage, then he is called a Qutb. He loses interest in doing the biddings of clients or money. His sole purpose is now looking after the balance of the world. He reaches an occult peak where he is said to be able to fly, appear in people's dreams, and be able to exist in two places at once. This is similar to the Sufi term of Qutb. However, that is more to do with the divine, and this here is to do with the occult. And these type of men usually live in seclusion and don't often bother with people. Either that or they move about constantly, but they stay away from society as a whole. Here's an interesting story. According to the article Shamanism in Afghanistan by Himayoun Sidikouy, it is said that after 9/11 and the invasion of Afghanistan, a few Afghan refugees to the United States have said that the invasion was due to the failed powers of a Qutb, or that he grew weak and wasn't able to stop it. Malungs in Afghan societies play an important role for the good and bad of the society. In the old days, when a person would be afflicted with disease or some sort of illness, then a Malung would be brought forth to help them. Before the 1960s, the Afghans who would go down with headaches or cold would be approached by a Malung. He would then treat them by extracting a small pea-like objects from their bodies and collect them in a jar and then dispose of them later. But not all Malung are saints at service. Some are mercenaries for hire, target killers even working for a price. Some of their methods are strange but effective. In one local village, a Malung was said to have used porcupine quills to scatter along the path his target walks on daily, and while scattering it, he will call upon the Jinn to cause violence and bloodshed on the victim's family as he steps on the quill. In another village, the Malung wraps lamb fat in a cloth and leaves it near a clay oven. As the fat melts away, the Malung asks the Jinn to melt away the victim as the fat melts away. If a victim becomes a target of a Malung, then he can employ another Malung who can fight or ward off the curse on their behalf. And to do so, the Malung must first initiate a ritual to either identify the Malung or the person who employed the Malung. And once he is found, the victim is either prescribed protective charms or given the option to counter-curse the one who cursed him. But there are stories of Malungs acting as healers and mercenaries, and one such is from Himayoun Sidikouy, the author of Shamanism in Afghanistan, who visited a village in 1979 to observe a Malung. He says, in 1979 in the town of Charkar, I attended the ritual healing of a young man who had been stung by a scorpion. His family members were greatly concerned because, so I was told, it was not uncommon for people to die from such stings. They immediately dispatched the boy to the bazaar to summon a Malung known for his ability to cure such scorpion stings. The healer, an old, white bearded man dressed in a dirty robe and carrying his asar staff, soon arrived. He had his patient sit down in a chair. After examining the sting, the Malung sat down on the floor in front of the young man. He produced a knife and an old safety razor from the pouch, strung around his shoulder underneath his robe, placing them on the floor in front of him. Picking up the knife and feeling its edge with his thumb, he placed the blade against his patient's skin about 12 centimeters above the string, and pressing the blade so as to indent but not break the skin. With a downward motion, he began stroking the affected leg, and as he manipulated the knife, the Malung recited magical formula, and at the end of each one he blew on the affected spot. This treatment, which lasted about 5 minutes, was said to neutralize the venom. Finally, using his safety razor, the Malung made a small incision just below the sting, and caught the resultant flow of dark-colored blood in a ceramic cup. After allowing the wound to bleed for about a minute, the Malang applied a wad of moist tobacco to it, then bound it with a piece of cloth. Tobacco, the healer told me, draws out all kinds of zehar, or toxin. The patient seemed greatly relieved by the Malang's administrations, which clearly combined both psychological and physiological procedures. Later, I learned that he had made a complete recovery with no further implications. Some Malang, I was told, cure scorpion stings and snake bites without bleeding their patients. Otherwise, their techniques are identical to those who I've just described. Himayoun then recalls a story told to him by a spiritual leader about a man trying to become a Malang. The leader said, Abdul Wali, one of our townsmen, decided to achieve mystical powers by performing a Qasida ritual. He shut himself in the burj, or tower, of his father's kala, or fort, and began to recite verses from the Quran. He did this for 3 days, and on the 3rd day everyone in the kala heard agonizing screams. It was Abdul Wali crying out that he was on fire. He said that a bearded dwarf wearing a black turban had come into the burj and pulled out a small piece of cotton from his pocket and began to fluff it by tearing off pieces. The cotton seemed to increase by some devilish device and soon filled the entire room. Then, scowling at Abdul Wali, this demon pulled out a box of matches and set the cotton on fire. Flames engulfed the burj, and when the door leading to the burj was finally opened by Abdul Wali's uncle and brothers, there was no fire. But Abdul Wali was in a state of hysteria, beating his own chest and head as if to extinguish the flames. The Jinn had beguiled this foolish man. Despite all efforts to calm him and stop him from running off, he broke loose and jumped out the window, shattering both his legs. The poor man rarely spoke any words after, and was in a state of melancholia until he died a few months later. The doctor from Kabul was unable to determine why Abdul Wali had died. Malang, shamans, bakshis have survived throughout the years and gone through an evolution process. Though their cultures which gave birth to them had disappeared, they lived on, and the reason for that is poverty, illiteracy, mixed with a whole of superstition. One main reason why Afghans back in the day used to go to a Malang was due to the fact that it was difficult to find Western medicine, or it'd be difficult to access a doctor, given that the majority of the people live below poverty. Coupling that with a high illiteracy rate, it would make sense that these superstitions still existed or even exist today. It is good to be a skeptic because the more you question, the more answers you'll find. But skepticism can only get you so far, and in the face of evidence that makes you think otherwise, it becomes useless. Stories like Abdul Wali makes you really question whether these types of things actually happen, whether people actually go mad enough to entangle with the unseen for more power. People either gain a lot of money or power or go mad in the process. And when dealing with the occult, this theme is consistent. Whatever the case, Allah knows best, and I leave it at that. Thank you.